June 5, 2009. Morning. Stephanie Lazarus is at her desk at Parker Center, LAPD headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. She's a decorated detective, 25 years on the force. That morning, two colleagues call her down to a room on a lower level. They say they need her expertise on an art theft case. She hands over her gun and equipment belt at the entrance. Standard procedure in that building. She walks into the interrogation room unarmed. She doesn't know it yet, but those two detectives were specifically chosen because they have no personal connection to her. No friendship, no shared history, no loyalty. And while she's sitting across that table, dozens of other LAPD officers are being driven to Simi Valley, told they're executing a search warrant out of town. The real operation is happening somewhere else entirely. The detectives start asking questions. Not about art, about a woman named Sherri Rasmussen. Lazarus says she doesn't really remember her. The detectives press. She's careful, measured. 23 years of police work, and she knows exactly how this game is played. Then they mention DNA. And something changes in the room, because Stephanie Lazarus already knows what that DNA is going to say. Let's go back to the beginning. February 24th, 1986, Van Nuys, California. Sherri Rasmussen was 29 years old, a nurse, director of critical care at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, one of the most respected hospitals in Los Angeles. Athletic, driven, deeply loved by everyone who knew her. 3 months earlier, she had married John Ruetten, an engineer she'd met in college. They had moved into a condo on Balboa Boulevard together. They were, by every account, happy. That morning, John left for work at 7:20. He kissed his wife goodbye. He drove away. At approximately 6 p.m., he came home. Sherri was on the living room floor, a toppled speaker beside her, a shattered ceramic vase, blood on the walls, on the CD player, on the front door. She had been beaten. She had been bitten. She had been shot 3 times in the chest with a .38 caliber handgun. The barrel of the gun had been pressed directly against her body for the final shot. She was 29 years old. They had been married 3 months. LAPD arrived quickly. They surveyed the scene. Electronics stacked near the stairwell. Sherri's BMW missing from the garage. The lead detective, Lyle Mayer, looked at it and drew a conclusion. Burglary gone wrong. That conclusion would define the next 23 years. Sherri's parents, Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, did not believe it for a single day. At the initial interview, they told Detective Mayer about a woman, a former girlfriend of John's, an LAPD patrol officer, someone who had shown up at Sherri's apartment uninvited, someone who had come to Sherri's workplace in full police uniform and told her to stay away from John. Mayer noted the name. 1 entry in 4 volumes of case files. No interview with the woman was ever conducted. Not one witness from Glendale Adventist, where several colleagues had seen the confrontation, was ever called. The burglary theory held. 5 weeks after the murder, 2 armed men broke into a nearby residence. The lead detective noted the similarity and pivoted. The personal angle was gone. A year later, Sherri's family held a press conference and announced a reward. They wrote directly to LAPD Chief Daryl Gates, naming the woman as a possible suspect. Detectives told them they watched too much television. Nels and Loretta kept calling. They were put on hold. Sometimes the line was simply disconnected. The case went cold. The person who killed Sherri Rasmussen continued going to work. Her name was Stephanie Lazarus. She had joined the LAPD in 1983. Before Sherri, she had been in a relationship with John Ruetten, or at least that's what she believed it was. John later described it differently, a casual arrangement, nothing serious. He had never considered her his girlfriend, but Lazarus had. When John told her he was marrying Sherri, she didn't accept it. She showed up at their apartment uninvited. She came to Glendale Adventist in uniform and confronted Sherri at work. She continued sleeping with John. He admitted this at trial, even after the engagement, saying he felt sorry for her, that he was young and stupid. Sherri found out. She confronted John. He asked for forgiveness. They married anyway in November 1985. 3 months later, Sherri was dead. In the 1990s, as Lazarus rose through the LAPD, she was assigned twice to the Van Nuys division, the very division that had investigated Sherri's murder. During those years, she had access to the case file. Every document, every note, all of it. In 1989, 3 years after the murder, John Ruetten traveled to Hawaii with Lazarus. Before he went, he called Detective Mayer and asked if anything tied Lazarus to the crime. Mayer said no. John went. He was traveling with his wife's killer, and he had no idea. In the late 1990s, the LAPD began applying DNA technology to cold cases. Forensic specialists reviewed the evidence from the Rasmussen case. There was a bite mark on Sherri's arm, taken during the struggle. A swab had been collected at the crime scene. It was sent for testing. The result came back. Female DNA. Clear, usable, completely inconsistent with the botched burglary theory. A criminalist reviewed the case file, found the single mention of a former girlfriend, an LAPD officer, and flagged it to her supervisor. Her supervisor's response: the detective was not a part of this. The case was a burglary. The evidence went back into storage. In March 2008, a Van Nuys homicide detective named Jim Nuttall came in one morning and found a box on the floor near his desk. Inside, 2 cold case files. One of them was Sherri Rasmussen's. Nuttall read through it. He and his partner Pete Barba agreed within hours. This was not a burglary. The DNA said female. The crime scene didn't fit. They were starting over. They interviewed John Ruetten again. When he mentioned Lazarus's name, Nuttall asked if she was still around. John said she was. She was a detective, still with the LAPD, working art theft cases in the Commercial Crimes Division. Nuttall needed her DNA. He couldn't compel her to provide one. He needed something she discarded voluntarily. Investigators covertly followed Stephanie Lazarus to a Costco in Simi Valley. She bought a drink. She threw the cup in the trash. A detective retrieved it. The DNA on the discarded cup matched the bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm. Nels Rasmussen, the father who had given police her name on the very first night, who had been told for 23 years that he watched too much television, was called. He was told they had a match. He later said it pointed to exactly the person he had been pointing to all along. Now they had to arrest her without tipping her off. Lazarus was still working in the department. She had access. She had colleagues everywhere. One wrong conversation, and she'd know she was being investigated. So they told a handful of senior officers. They kept the real operation hidden from everyone else. Dozens of detectives were driven out of the city that morning on a fake search warrant, and 2 carefully chosen detectives, men who had never met Stephanie Lazarus, who had no connection to her, called her to a room at Parker Center under the pretense of an art theft consultation. Back in the interrogation room, the detectives pressed her gently on the DNA. Lazarus asked if she would need to provide a sample. They said it was possible. She said she'd need to speak with someone first. She stood up. She walked toward the door. And they stopped her. Handcuffs. Miranda rights. Arrested for the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. 23 years, 3 months, and 11 days after Sherri died. The officer who arrested her noted afterward that she still had her badge on her chest, still carrying her detective's credentials, still formally employed by the same department that had failed to find her for over 2 decades. At trial in 2012, prosecutors laid out the motive clearly: a scorned woman who could not accept that John Ruetten had chosen someone else. Her own journal entries, collected as evidence, confirmed the depth of her obsession. Her DNA was on the victim's body. Her gun was the same caliber as the murder weapon. 13 days after the killing, she had reported it stolen, not to her own department's armorer, as required, but to the Santa Monica police. It was never recovered. The defense attacked the DNA chain of custody, argued improper storage, argued the bite swab had been contaminated. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty. First-degree murder. On March 8, 2012, Stephanie Lazarus was sentenced to 27 years to life. She was 52 years old. At her 2023 parole hearing, after decades of denying everything, Lazarus finally confessed to the crime. The parole board initially granted her request. The full board later rescinded it. Sherri Rasmussen died in 2018. He had spent 32 years telling anyone who would listen exactly who had killed his daughter. Detectives told him he watched too much television. Sherri Rasmussen was 29 years old. She had been married for 3 months. She was a nurse who had worked her way up to director of critical care. She was, by every account, the kind of person who made the room better when she walked into it. The person who killed her wore a badge for 23 more years, and the system that badge was supposed to represent spent 2 decades making sure no one ever found out. If this case stayed with you, please subscribe to Verdict Files. We cover new cases every week, and your support helps us keep telling these stories. Hit the like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with someone who follows true crime. Every share brings more attention to cases that deserve it. We'll see you in the next case.